how many of you folks, please raise your hand if you know what Kubernetes is or heard of? Oh, this is awesome. Coverage. So Joe is a CTO and co-founder of Heptio, the company behind Kubernetes, and he's also one of the persons pushing for cloud-native solutions for enterprises. Prior to Heptio, he spent 10 years at Google, where he was a technical lead for Google Compute Engine and also created Kubernetes. No more, no less. During Google's tenure, he also built and launched Google Talk. I was a personal fan of that. And spent 7 years at Microsoft, where he worked on Internet Explorer, which I'm sure you're jealous of. So, Joe, welcome again. And the first question I have for you is, why did you bother building Compute Engine and Kubernetes? What was, if you go through memory lane, what was the appealing part of convincing folks to do that?
Well, I think there were very different reasons between Compute Engine and Kubernetes, and sort of one led into the other. You know, for the longest time, Google didn't think there was real business in cloud. It was kind of a side project. But I think there were a group of us that really saw that, you know, based on the scale, based on where things were going, cloud was going to be a big deal. And so Compute Engine was really just us getting in the game, building something that could stand side by side with, you know, Amazon, and start to build a base that we could build more things on top of. One of those things then ended up being Kubernetes. And so the real issue for Google was, as cloud became a bigger and bigger deal, how do you get Googlers building stuff in a way similar to the way that folks outside of the company are building stuff? Because you want to be able to dog food your own products. And so it was either convince Google to move away from Borg, which is a container management system that Google uses internally, and start using raw VMs, or get the rest of the world to use a Borg-like system. And so that's really where Kubernetes came from.
Do we have a quick explanation for what Borg is?
A lot of computers, a lot of stuff to run. How do you decide which things run on which computers and make sure they don't interfere with each other?
Okay.
Containers.
So you've been talking about cloud native. You wrote a book about that. What is this revolution that we've been saying?
So I don't think anybody has. There's no like concrete definition of what cloud native is. So I'll let you know sort of my take on it. I think it's processes, tools, and really, you know, culture. People systems around how you take advantage of automated systems so that you can ship software faster, more reliably. And I think that really brings the theme of this conference together about building software that helps you build better software and makes better decisions along the way.
Kind of scratch the next question is, what does it matter to people in this room, and to kind of reiterate on that? Yeah,
so I think, and this is, you know, we're going to be getting into that, the whole Ford versus Tesla thing, is that there's sort of like a newer way of thinking about building software. It's data-driven, it's trusting your organization, it's giving them tools so that they can move really fast, and you actually have the controls and the understanding for doing that in a safe way. And then there's the older way of doing things, which is incredibly, you know, human-intensive. Everything's based on a ticket system. It takes 2 weeks or 2 months to get anything done. I like to say that ticketing systems are kind of, you know, crappy APIs with humans on either end, right? Whereas cloud native is you move to things that are real APIs. So you move from 2 weeks to like, you know, maybe, you know, 2 minutes to get things done. And it fundamentally changes the way that you work. And it allows you to build systems on top of that that can be more data-driven, more automatic.
So we are noticing the key transformation in the industry from different companies. We'll reiterate in a few seconds on that, the Teslas versus the Fords. So that's one. Any other key transformation we are seeing as a result of this cloud native trend?
Yeah, so I think, you know, related to this is ideas around things like microservices, where I look at microservices as a way of not just, you know, scaling your applications, more nodes, more users, but also how do you scale your teams? How do you actually go through and break your problem down into smaller pieces so that you can have teams that can operate independently and you know, but still actually work towards a common goal. So that often comes along with cloud native. As we address enterprises, I think it's also important to recognize that you can be cloud native even if you're not running on the cloud, right? You can take these techniques around building automation, building automated system, moving fast, even if you're running right next to your mainframe. right? And applications are not sort of like one thing. They end up being a bunch of components, and you can start really taking advantage of all of these techniques without moving everything over at once.
So to get into the title of the talk is like, you're talking about the Ford and the Teslas. So do you want to expand a little bit about what you mean by those categories and how you think about them? And then we can talk more about tools and processes and culture as you're talking about.
Can we define who are the Teslas and who are the Fords for everybody in the audience?
Yeah, so I think, just using Ford and Tesla as an example, and please don't over-rotate on those specific companies, but you have companies that fundamentally understand software, and they're software defined in a whole bunch of different ways. They can move fast, but they don't necessarily have the domain knowledge to be able to actually excel in a particular vertical, right? So like Tesla is a software company, or at least something that internalizes software in a core way, working to learn how to become a car company. On the other hand, you have something like Ford. I mean, how long for, like a century? I don't know, like a century of building cars. There's a long history there. But they're realizing that for them to actually be relevant in today's market, they need to become software defined. And there's a huge shift from that sort of, old way of thinking to something where you really have to think about shipping software, delivering product faster, delivering it in a safe way. And that same dynamic across sort of the Teslas and the Fords is playing its way out, across every industry, right? I think you can, throw a dart and you'll hit something, and a lot of times people are afraid that it's Amazon that they're going to be competing with. But if not them, then somebody's going to come along who understands software, who can really disrupt and change the game.
So let's take the Ford, for example. So what are the challenges that they have to face? What are the transformation? How do they think about that shift for them? And how do they go through that transformation?
Yeah, so this is, what a lot of folks call digital transformation. There's, a lot of people will sell you very expensive consulting services around this. We're trying to look at it from a tooling experience at Heptio to help the Fords of the world move forward. The first thing to recognize is that it's a trust issue. You have to get to the point where you trust engineers, you trust developers, you trust the teams to be able to make decisions and move fast. And so many of the processes and the sort of battle scars that have been built up over time in these organizations are all built up to slow things down. And so the challenge for these companies is to figure out what parts of their institutional knowledge are actually critical for them being successful, and which parts of their sort of institutional knowledge is maybe no longer relevant, maybe there's better ways to do things, and really tease those things apart so you can get to the point where you trust people to be able to make decisions, move faster, and you have the systems in place where you can support them, understand when things aren't working, automatically roll back, automatically understand the metrics that matter.
And so that transformation, like, how do they think about product? It's like, do they need to change the way they think and approach it beyond just being more nimble?
Well, I think there's, just like in software development, we realize that there are severe limitations when you have a waterfall method of doing things, where you define what's happening, you build it, and then you ship it, and you don't go back and iterate on that loop. One of the things about software-defined businesses and embracing that software-defined nature is actually being able to turn that loop faster and to experiment and see what works. Now, obviously, I think, when you're shipping software to a car, you maybe have to be a little bit more careful. You don't have to, but maybe there's parts of that experience that you can actually iterate on faster than other parts of the experience. And you have to build the right checks and balances in there so that you can be safe, you can work within the constraints, but then also, leverage that software to be able to create those virtuous cycles wherever possible.
Cool. And so on the other side, for the Teslas, you said they have a transformation to go through. So they're starting from a much more nimble, experimentation-driven position. But what do they need to do to win? What are their challenges?
So their challenges is that they're sort of rederiving things from first principles oftentimes. They have to because they don't have that long institutional knowledge. One of the examples, and this doesn't deal with software, is, I have this friend who, most people, when they want to do something fun and do their own sort of craft business, they go off and start brewing beer. If you want to be challenging, you start distilling spirits. right? If you want to be really challenging, you go and you start like a charcuterie where you're actually doing so now dealing with like the FDA is a whole nother process. And what he had to do, and he showed this to me, is he has a binder of all the processes that he has to go through so that he can actually safely prove that he's not going to make people sick. And this is not something you can go and buy off the shelf. He had to rederive this from first principles to be able to enter that market. And I think you see that type of thing happen where, yeah, you can hire experienced people, you can bring them in, but that doesn't guarantee that you're actually going to end up with that same product. And I think I don't know a ton of folks at Tesla. I'm not going to pretend that I have a lot of experience there, but they've definitely had their teething issues in terms of learning how to build a car, and they're making mistakes that somebody like a Ford would never make because they just know you don't do that. That's not how it works.
So you talked about the Teslas of the world. Carving new tools and technologies that are now widely available. Can we talk about that, who those are?
So, yeah, I think the advent of cloud has really started democratizing a lot of these tools. I spent 10 years at Google. Google has been working on building their own internal platforms for a long time. Oftentimes people talk about these things as being force multipliers for engineers at Google. That is not nearly as true as it actually used to be. You can go out and have access to incredible computing power with a credit card. The software systems are catching up to be able to actually harness that power in a reasonable way. And so we're shifting from having access to this technology to figuring out how do I actually apply this technology inside of my organization in a way where it's actually going to be effective. And that's why when we circle back to the idea of cloud native, it's not just having access to these tools, it's also having the organizational structure to be able to use them in a wise way. And so it starts with the tooling, it starts with the access to that technology, but it really ends up being a people problem more than anything else.
Do you want to expand a little bit about that? What are you thinking in terms of organization, and what are the shifts that needs to happen?
Yeah, so in terms of that shift, it's like I said, I think a big part of it is actually building trust. Right now, so many organizations, every time something goes wrong, they react to it by creating more process. And you repeat that over and over and over again, and pretty soon people feel like they can't get anything done. The shift there that I think folks need to make is that when something happens, you don't create more process, you actually create more tools. And as those tools get better, you can move even faster. And so one of the things that we're doing at Heptio, and I think a lot of other companies are doing something similar, is we're thinking about how do we apply the SRE mindset to other parts of our business. And so, again, this is one of those things where, what is SRE exactly? But in my mind, the idea here is that as you have outages, as you have problems, you take a dispassionate look of where things went wrong, and then you have the support across the organization to go through and fix the root cause of those issues. Whereas typical ops is, you woke up at 2 a.m., it was horrible, you go, fix the problem, stop the bleeding, and then around the water cooler, you're like, yeah, that sucked last night. SREs are like, how do we fix it so that never happens again? That attitude of continual improvement with short loops is the cultural change that needs to happen.
So we got the 4 minutes warning. So 2 more questions. One is to wrap up. One, very short. I know we said a race between the Teslas and the Fords. Is really a race, or do you see both converging to a world where the best practice will be adopted across both type of industries?
Yeah, I don't think that there is necessarily going to be there's going to be crosstalk across these things. I think they're not completely parallel tracks. And so we're starting to see more of these traditional enterprises companies be open to actually taking these ideas. They feel this existential risk. And I think that folks attacking incumbent businesses are recognizing that they can't go it their own. They really do need to actually, leverage the expertise that's out there.
And then one more, I wanted to ask you guys first. Please raise your hand if the company you work for releases software as fast as 1 time per hour. 1, 2 hands. How about once per day at least? More hands. And how about once a month at least? The vast majority. So at Split, we have the belief that as you move faster, as you get into the train of continuous delivery, there have to be better tools that can help you move faster in a secure way, and so that you understand the consequence of your actions. So what can we tell those folks that this cloud native trend can do for those that raise the hand that move to deployments once a month that want to get into a faster cadence?
Start small, build some successes, get folks comfortable with this idea. I think that there's a hump that you need to get over as you go from once a month to, say, once a day, where you have to build confidence in your processes and your tools to be able to do that. One of the things I like about systems like Split is that you can separate out shipping binaries from shipping features, which gives you a lot more flexibility to build that confidence so that you can actually start shipping things more frequently. It's not an easy journey to get there, but once you do, it really does pay dividends.
Joe, thank you so much for sharing the stage with us. Always a pleasure to have you here, and for being close to ourselves and to me as a mentor.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.